The story follows a woman whose peaceful, ordinary life with her husband begins to crumble when their shared savings mysteriously disappear. He insists the money was lost through bad investments and urges her to cut expenses while he works longer hours. She tries to believe him, convincing herself that stress is causing his coldness and late nights. But small clues begin to unsettle her. Receipts that do not match their budget. A faint perfume on his clothes. A new watch she never saw him buy. His phone locked more often, his eyes avoiding hers. She pushes the doubts aside, determined to protect her marriage. Everything changes when the electricity is shut off because the bill was never paid. That shock drives her to check their bank records, where she finds a transfer to a bank she has never heard of. Curiosity turns into dread as she follows the trail. Eventually, she discovers a hidden second account under his name alone. The statements show dinners, gifts, hotel rooms, and travel for a life she never knew he had. The discovery shatters her. In a quiet confrontation, he tries to deny everything, then minimizes the betrayal, then blames her. But the truth spills out. He has been living a double life with another woman for months, using their savings to fund it. After the heartbreak comes clarity. She documents everything, contacts an attorney, gathers financial evidence, and protects herself from further harm. The truth eventually becomes public among their relatives and community, leaving him exposed and ashamed. She steps away from the marriage with dignity. In the final healing arc, she rebuilds her life slowly, learning to trust herself again. She finds her own financial footing, reconnects with friends, and creates a new sense of home and peace. The story closes with her reflecting on the lessons of betrayal, courage, and self-respect. The night my husband told me the money had simply vanished, something inside me went quiet, the same way the house does just before a storm breaks. I remember standing there with the dish towel still in my hands, staring at him as if he had spoken a language I had never heard before. Money does not vanish. It does not slip through cracks like water. It does not wake up one morning and decide it no longer belongs to you. But he said it with such calm certainty that for a moment, I wondered if I was the unreasonable one, if maybe I had forgotten how things worked in this world. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the soft yellow glow of the small bulb above the stove. The soup on the burner simmered with a tired little hiss, thin as the air between us. Outside, rain tapped against the window in uneven rhythms, a soft percussion that made the silence in the room feel even heavier. I could smell the faint scent of wet earth drifting in from the crack of the slightly open window. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and unsure, as I waited for him to say anything that would make sense. He looked worn out, shoulders slumped, tie loosened, but the cologne on him was new, sharper, more expensive. It clung to his shirt like a whisper from a place I had never been. I did not ask about it. I did not ask many things during that period. When you love someone, you try to believe them even when your stomach tightens and your heart beats in an uneasy rhythm. He told me again that the money was gone. Investments turned bad. Markets unpredictable. A streak of terrible luck. He said it all with a steady voice, as if rehearsed, as if he had practiced saying it enough times that emotion no longer tangled in the words. I nodded, not because I understood, but because I did not want to make things harder for him, or at least, that was what I told myself. Before all of this, our life was simple, predictable, in a comforting way. Every morning, the sun slipped through the small kitchen window and painted a warm square of light on the tiled floor. I would stand in that spot, while the kettle boiled, feeling the warmth rise around my legs. The smell of instant coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of dish soap lingering on my hands. He would walk into the kitchen with sleepy eyes, rubbing the back of his neck, letting out a small groan that sounded like a man waking to a world he loved. He would sit at the table, drumming his fingers lightly on the wood while I set down breakfast. Scrambled eggs with a sprinkle of pepper. Toast browned unevenly because our toaster was older than our marriage. A little fruit when the season was affordable. Sometimes, he would lean forward and kiss my forehead, murmuring that I was the reason his mornings were bearable. Those moments felt like tiny blessings, small but bright enough to hold on to during long days. Our home was nothing extraordinary, but it was ours. A modest two-bedroom place with a narrow hallway that always smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I tucked into drawers. The living room had a soft gray couch that sagged a little on one side where he always sat. A crocheted throw blanket I had made myself draped over the backrest. The walls had framed photos of vacations we once took, weekend trips to the lake, selfies with wind in our hair and sunburn on our noses. I worked part-time at a neighborhood grocery store, a quiet little place with a bell over the door that chimed every time someone entered. The shelves smelled of cardboard and sugar and detergent. I knew the regulars by their habits. Mrs. Paddle always bought the same tea. Old Mr. Carter chatted about the weather even when it did not change. College kids rushed in for instant noodles at late hours. My days were simple, filled with small tasks that kept me busy and grounded. Stock shelves. Sweep the back room. Ring up purchases. Smile at strangers. Walk home with tired feet, but a peaceful mind. I would push open the door and be greeted by the soft warmth of home, by the faint scent of whatever spices I planned to cook with, by the knowledge that my husband would be home for dinner soon. In those days, even the ordinary moments felt like comfort. Folding laundry while watching old shows, sharing a bowl of popcorn on Sundays, arguing playfully over who burned the last batch of cookies. On weekends, we sometimes drove to the farmer's market in the early morning. The stalls were filled with fresh vegetables and flowers, and he always bought me a small bouquet of daisies or marigolds. Not big gestures, just quiet ones, the kind that made me believe we were building a life together piece by piece. He used to be a man who found joy in simple things. Cooking with me. Fixing the loose cabinet door. Laughing at silly jokes. Talking about dreams for the future, like maybe saving up for a bigger place with a garden, or taking a trip to the mountains once our finances allowed. I looked at him then with trust that felt like second nature. I believed in him, in his ambition, in his promises, but somewhere along the way, those promises stretched thin. His smile became something rare, as if it cost him more than he could afford. His laughter grew shorter. His patience wore down like frayed threads. Our meals changed too. Instead of hearty dinners, we had smaller plates, cheaper ingredients. He told me to cut back, that we needed to be smart. I listened. I always listened. I made soups with more broth than meat. I stretched leftover rice into fried rice with whatever vegetables were discounted that week. I stopped buying treats. I stopped buying flowers. He began coming home later. Some nights so late that I sat alone at the table with a cold plate of food and the steady ticking of the wall clock as my only company. When he finally walked in, he looked exhausted but strangely distant, as if part of him was somewhere else entirely. He blamed it on stress. On deadlines. On clients. On life. And I nodded because I did not want to be another weight pressing on his shoulders. But even in those early days, before any real suspicion formed, something in the air shifted. A tension so faint that I could almost pretend it was not there. A heaviness settling into corners of our home where warmth used to live. There were moments when I caught him staring at nothing, jaw tight, brows drawn together, as if he was thinking about something that had nothing to do with us. And when I asked what was wrong, he said everything was fine with a smile too thin to be real. I wanted to hold on to the version of him I knew. The man who kissed my forehead. The man who brought home flowers. The man who once traced circles on my palm while telling me we would grow old together. But the truth is, I could already feel him slipping away long before I understood why. The shift did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a draft slipping under a closed door, so soft that I almost mistook it for my imagination. It began one late afternoon as I walked home from the grocery store, a paper bag pressed against my hip, filled with discounted vegetables and a loaf of bread that had been marked down at the end of the day. The weather was warm, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine from the neighbor's yard. I remember thinking how beautiful it all seemed. How peaceful. I was trying to hold on to that peace the way someone might hold on to a railing during a slow descent. When I stepped into the house, the first thing I noticed was his jacket draped over the back of a chair. It was not strange for him to leave things around, but the smell that lingered on the fabric made me freeze. A soft, sweet perfume clung to the collar, something floral and youthful with a lingering warmth that felt too deliberate, too intimate. It was a scent I had never worn in my life. I lifted the collar slightly, pressing it closer to my face as if smelling it again would make it make sense. My heart thudded once, heavy and uncertain. When I asked him about it later, he brushed it off casually, saying that someone at work had stood too close, perhaps leaned over him. He said it lightly, with a half-smile that did not reach his eyes. His explanation slid over me like cool water, but underneath, a part of me remained unconvinced. I tried to push the thought away. People pick up scents. It happens. I told myself that doubt was a dangerous seed, and once planted, it grew roots fast, but the roots were already there. A few days later, I found a restaurant receipt tucked halfway under the microwave. The paper was cream-colored, the ink slightly smudged, but the name of the place was clear. It was a restaurant I had seen once in a magazine, the kind that served artfully arranged dishes and charged more than we spent on groceries in a week. The total printed on the bottom made my stomach flutter with nerves. 2 meals. 2 drinks. A dessert. I ran my thumb across the paper slowly. He told me he had been working late that night, too busy even to grab takeout. When I asked him about the receipt, he said it had been a work dinner, that he had been reimbursed, that I should not worry about it. His voice was calm, measured, perhaps a little too measured, like someone walking carefully across thin ice. I told myself again to let it go. But after that day, I noticed more small shifts. The way he stepped away when his phone buzzed. The way he tilted the screen slightly out of my view, as if protecting the glow of it. He used to leave his phone on the table face up, sometimes forgotten entirely, while we talked or cleaned or cooked. Now he kept it close, the way someone might guard a fragile secret. Even his laughter changed. There were nights he came home smiling in a way that did not feel meant for me, a softness in his eyes I had not seen in months, but it vanished the moment he looked in my direction, replaced by the dull gray tiredness he saved for me. I noticed his clothes too. A new shirt he swore he had owned for years. A belt I had never seen before. A watch with a darker strap and sleeker face than the one I had gifted him long ago. He said he found it in a drawer. He said it had always been there. The lies were small. They came dressed in ordinary explanations. But when placed side by side, they formed a shadow behind him that grew longer every day. One evening, after a day of work that left my feet aching and my back stiff, I came home to find the electricity bill propped against the fruit bowl. The envelope had a red stamp across the front warning of past due balance. I stared at it for a long time, running my fingers over the rough paper. He had told me he would handle the bills. He had promised me I did not need to worry. When I brought it up to him, he sighed loudly, as if I were mentioning something trivial, an inconvenience. He told me he had simply forgotten to pay it, that it had slipped his mind. But there was an edge to his voice, a hint of irritation, as if my concern was an interruption to something more important. I apologized, even though I did not know what I was apologizing for. That night, while he showered, I ran my fingertips over the counter where the envelope had been. I stared at the dark window above the sink, seeing my reflection faintly, the shape of a woman who was trying so hard to believe that nothing had changed. But things had changed. I felt it in the uneven rhythm of his footsteps when he walked into the house. I heard it in the pauses between his sentences. Too long, too calculated. I saw it in his hands, restless, fidgeting, no longer reaching for me the way they used to. The clues were small, but they were many. A scent, a receipt, a bill, a new watch, a late night, a story that shifted every time I tried to grasp it. And somewhere beneath all those pieces, my heart whispered a truth I was not ready to face. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And whatever it was, it had already begun changing the shape of my marriage long before I knew where to look. The moment everything changed did not arrive with a bang. It arrived quietly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. As I stood alone in the living room, sorting through a stack of unopened mail that had been gathering dust on the corner table, the sunlight filtered through the curtains in thin golden stripes, landing across my hands, warming my skin as if trying to soften what I was about to find. Most of the envelopes were dull reminders of daily life. Coupons. Advertisements. A notice from the utility company that made my stomach clench even though I already expected it. But near the bottom of the stack was an envelope made of thicker paper, smooth beneath my fingertips. It bore the name of a bank I had never heard him mention. When I turned it over, my heart gave a strange, slow thump. It was addressed only to him. Not to both of us, the way our joint accounts always were. Just his name, written cleanly and deliberately. I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of it growing heavier in my hand. A voice inside me whispered that opening it would cross a line. A line I had honored my entire marriage. Trust had always been the foundation of our home. And breaking it felt like breaking something sacred. But trust is not meant to be a blindfold. I slipped a finger under the seal and opened the envelope with a careful motion, as if the truth inside were fragile and might shatter. The paper unfolded with a soft rustle, and there, in black ink, was something I had not prepared myself to see. A bank statement. Not from our account. Not from the place where our savings used to live. A second account. Secret. Separate. Active. I read the name again, making sure my mind was not inventing things. But it was real. As real as the blood suddenly rushing in my ears and the tremble beginning in my hands. I sank onto the sofa, the cushion dipping beneath my weight. The living room felt dimmer. Though the sunlight was still there, the clock on the wall ticked steadily, unaware that time inside my chest had halted. Transaction after transaction lined the page. Restaurants I had never eaten at. Hotels I had never stepped foot in. Purchases from boutiques that sold perfumes with the same sweet floral scent I had smelled on his collar. There were afternoons carved out in the shape of receipts. Nights recorded in room numbers and checkout times. Weekends spent in places he had told me were business trips, conferences, meetings. I traced the dates with my fingertip, recalling what I had been doing on those same nights. Making soup. Washing dishes. Waiting at the window for the sound of his car. Folding laundry with the thought that he must be so tired, so overworked. Planning small surprises for when things got better. On one date, a hotel stay matched the night he had called me sounding exhausted, telling me he would be home late because he was finalizing a deal. That night, I had stayed up almost until dawn, worrying that he was carrying too much on his shoulders. I had prayed for him in a quiet whisper, asking life to give him strength. He had not been at work that night. He had been somewhere else. With someone else. The paper trembled as I held it, and I had to place it on my lap to steady it. My throat tightened. My chest ached in a way I had no words for. It was not just heartbreak. It was a sense of betrayal that reached beyond emotion and into the deepest corners of our shared life. I thought of every small sacrifice I had made, every meal I had thinned out to stretch the groceries. Every time I had told myself that love meant understanding, patience, support. Every late night I had sat alone believing he was working for us while he was spending our money on a life I had never been invited into. A sharp ringing began in my ears. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. The room tilted for a moment, as if the weight of the truth had shifted its axis. I forced myself to look again, to read every line. When I reached the bottom of the page, my eye caught something that made the air leave my lungs. A large transfer, a significant amount, sent from our joint account into this secret one. The date matched the week he had told me we needed to tighten our belts because everything had gone wrong. That was the week he had insisted on canceling my dentist appointment. The week he had told me to stop buying fresh fruit for a while because it was too expensive. The week he had said we might need to sell the old furniture to catch up. He had not lost the money. He had moved it. The betrayal rose inside me like a tide, slow and relentless. It filled every space within me until my eyes burned with tears I did not want to shed. Not for him. Not for this. I folded the statement carefully, almost too carefully, as if treating it gently would make the truth easier to bear. It did not. My fingers felt numb, my legs felt heavy as I stood and walked to the dining table, laying the paper down as if laying down a confession I had never asked for. I took out our laptop, the one we shared, the one where he had always told me not to worry about checking the accounts because it would stress me out. I signed in with the password he had once chosen for both of us, a sentimental word from early in our marriage. The page loaded slowly. The joint account balance appeared in a hollow blue bar across the screen. It was even lower than I had feared. Nearly emptied. Only crumbs remained. Below, the transactions told the rest of the story. Transfer after transfer to the same hidden account. Carefully spaced. Carefully disguised. One small enough to go unnoticed. Another timed right before the electricity bill was due. My hands curled into fists, not from rage, but from the sharp sting of realization. He had watched me struggle to stretch meals. He had watched me worry about overdue notices. He had watched the lights flicker and the water bill arrive and the budget tighten like a knot around my ribs. He had watched. And he had done nothing. Because he had not needed to. He had money. He had plenty. It simply was not meant for us anymore. A sound rose in my throat, something between a sob and a gasp. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to hold myself together, but the truth kept cracking through me like glass under pressure. I thought about calling him. About confronting him in a burst of fury. About crying, or shouting, or demanding answers. But something inside me, something deep and steady, whispered that this was not the moment to break. This was the moment to see clearly. To gather everything. To understand the full shape of the truth before speaking even a single word. I closed the laptop gently. The click echoed in the quiet room like the closing of a chapter. In that moment, standing alone in the dimming light, surrounded by the soft ticking of the wall clock, I felt something shift within me. A quiet resolve. A slow awakening. The beginning of a strength I had not known I possessed. The truth had finally surfaced. And now, whether I was ready or not, I could no longer pretend I was living the same life I had lived the day before. The hours after the discovery felt unreal, as if I were walking through a house that looked like mine but did not belong to me anymore. Every corner felt altered. Every sound seemed sharper. Even the air felt heavier, as though it carried the weight of secrets that had been living with me far longer than I realized. I stood by the kitchen sink for a long time, staring at my own reflection in the dark window. My face looked pale under the fading afternoon light, my eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else. Something steadier. A quiet strength I had not felt in years. I kept thinking about the nights I had stayed awake waiting for him. The meals I had reheated. The bills I had worried over alone. And now I understood. He had not been fighting a battle against loss. He had been building a life that did not include me. The knowledge settled in my bones like cold water, but instead of falling apart, I found myself becoming still. Focused. Like a person standing at the edge of a dark forest, finally seeing the path that had been hidden in the shadows. I needed to think. To plan. Each step had to be careful. Not out of fear of him, but out of respect for myself. For the years I had given. For the life I still needed to rebuild. I picked up the folder with the bank statement and placed it carefully in my bag. Then I gathered the overdue bills. The other statements. The small clues I had collected without realizing they were clues. I stacked everything neatly, my hands moving with a purpose that steadied me. I knew I could not confront him right away. Confrontation would only give him time to twist the truth, to manipulate the story, to make me doubt what I already knew. If I was going to face him, I needed to be prepared. I needed facts, and I needed support from someone who understood the world of finances and law better than I did. I had an aunt who once told me that when betrayal comes, the first instinct is to break. But the stronger instinct, the one that keeps a woman alive, is to gather herself before anyone sees the damage. That was what I was doing now. The house was too quiet, so I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. The air was cool and crisp. The late afternoon sun cast a soft glow over the street, making everything seem deceptively peaceful. I locked the door and walked down the path toward the main road. My steps steady even though my heart still trembled. I reached the small cafe a few blocks away. It was nearly empty, filled only with the gentle clinking of cups and the muted hum of quiet conversations. I chose a table in the corner, where the shadows were softer, and placed the folder on the table in front of me. I ran my fingers over the edge of it, breathing deeply as I prepared myself for what needed to happen next. I knew I had to speak to someone who could help me understand what I was looking at. Someone who could explain what my rights were, what this meant for my future, how to protect myself before it was too late. I had a friend from the grocery store, a woman with a calm voice and a sharp mind, who had once mentioned she knew a legal counselor who helped people quietly, respectfully. She had told me that this counselor understood financial manipulation, hidden accounts, and the kind of betrayal that leaves a person lost. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone, but I steadied them by pressing my palm against the table. I closed my eyes for a moment before calling my friend. When she answered, her voice was warm, familiar, and I felt a tightness in my chest loosen slightly. I did not tell her everything, only that I needed the number she had once mentioned. She did not ask why. She only said she would send it, and she did, moments later. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing how deep the drop was. But I was also aware of something else. I was not falling anymore. I was choosing the next step. I took a slow breath and dialed the number. The counselor answered with a composed, steady tone. I explained what I could without breaking. I told her about the missing money, the second account, the overdue bills. I described my confusion, my worry, the feeling of betrayal pressing on my ribs. She listened without interrupting, and her calm silence felt like a hand placed gently on my shoulder. When she spoke, her voice held no judgment, only clarity. She told me that hidden accounts were not uncommon in situations like mine. She explained that financial deception was a form of betrayal that carried legal consequences. She said I would need evidence, documentation, details. She encouraged me to gather everything, to keep copies, to remain composed. She also reminded me of something I had forgotten, that my well-being mattered, that I was not powerless, that I was capable of seeing the truth and acting on it. Her words anchored me. When I ended the call, I sat there for a long moment, letting her guidance sink in. The cafe felt warmer now, the soft chatter around me like a gentle reminder that life still moved, even when hearts were breaking. I opened the folder and looked through the papers again, this time with steadier hands. I began to take photos of the documents, saving them carefully. I made notes in a small notebook I kept in my bag, dates, amounts, places. I wrote down the timeline, the shifts in his behavior, the changes in our finances. Piece by piece, the chaos began to take shape. When I walked home, the sky was beginning to darken, streaked with soft purple clouds. The streetlights flickered on, casting long yellow pools across the pavement. With each step, the weight in my chest felt different. Still heavy, but shifting, becoming something closer to determination. When I reached the front door, I hesitated. The quiet inside the house felt different now, as if it held a story I no longer belonged to. I placed my hand on the doorknob and breathed in slowly before stepping inside. He was not home yet. His shoes were not by the door. The living room was untouched, stillness hanging like a curtain. I walked to the dining table and set down my bag. Then I moved through each room, turning on the small lamps that cast soft pools of light. The house felt less threatening when the shadows were pushed back. Standing there, in the warm lamp glow, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer let confusion guide me. I would no longer accept explanations that did not feel true. I would no longer shrink myself to fit into the version of our marriage he wanted me to see. A storm had been building quietly for months. But now, I was no longer waiting for it to break. I was preparing for what came after. He came home that evening the way he always did, keys clattering in the bowl by the door, steps heavy along the hallway. From the kitchen, I heard the familiar sounds and felt an unfamiliar calm settle over me. It was not the soft calm of denial. It was the stillness that comes after a decision has already been made in the quiet of your own mind. The lights in the living room cast a warm glow across the table where I had laid out a small stack of papers. Nothing dramatic. No shouting inside my head. Just printed proof resting on the smooth wood surface, waiting. When he stepped into the room, he frowned slightly at the sight of the documents. His eyes moved from the table to my face and back again. He asked what all of that was. His tone held a mix of irritation and caution. the voice of a man who suspects trouble but believes he can talk his way around it. I told him calmly that I had been going through our finances. I described how the overdue bills had pushed me to look more closely. I mentioned the strange charges, the transfers, the second bank's name I had never heard before. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply laid out the facts like a line of stones between us. For a moment, he tried to pretend he did not understand. He narrowed his eyes as though the papers were written in another language. He asked why I was digging into things he always handled. He called it unnecessary worry. Then he reached for one of the statements, scanned it, and I watched his face change. There it was. The flicker. The realization that I knew more than he had ever expected me to know. He began with excuses. He said some of the charges were for clients. He said the hotel rooms belonged to colleagues. The restaurants were business-related. He insisted that transfers were temporary, part of a plan to regain what we had lost. His voice grew faster, less steady, as if the story could outrun the truth. I let him speak until the words tangled themselves into contradiction. Then I quietly pointed to a date on the paper. I reminded him where he had told me he was that night. I reminded him how I had stayed awake, waiting for him, worrying about his safety, while he was in a room paid for with money taken from our home. The lie could no longer hold its shape. Silence spilled into the room like water escaping through a crack. His shoulders slumped a little. His eyes hardened, not with shame, but with something closer to frustration. A trapped kind of anger, like someone caught in a net they had woven themselves. He asked how I found out. He did not ask how I felt. That told me everything. I told him that I had spoken to a legal counselor, that I understood now how hidden accounts worked, that I knew this was not an accident but a choice. I watched the realization pass through him, the awareness that I had stepped out of the role of quiet, trusting wife and into someone he had not expected me to become. He raised his voice then, blaming stress, bad decisions, temptations, anything but himself. He tried to turn the focus onto my questions, claiming that my suspicion was the real problem, that my lack of faith had pushed him away. The words washed over me with no weight. The woman I had been a few months before might have crumbled under that, might have doubted herself, apologized, begged, clung. But standing there with the cold truth of those statements between us, I felt something else instead. Clarity. I told him that I would not shout. I would not argue in circles. I would not fight to convince him of what we both already knew. He had taken money from our shared life and used it to build something separate with another person. He had left me in the dark, both literally and figuratively, while he dined in places lit with soft golden light and slept in crisp white sheets paid for by the sacrifices I had made. His expression tightened. He asked what I was going to do. There was fear in his voice now, mixed with defiance. A man who realizes he may be about to lose the safety he had taken for granted. I told him, slowly and clearly, that I would be protecting myself, that I had documentation, that I understood my rights, that I would no longer pretend not to see what was in front of me. I did not threaten. I did not promise revenge. I simply promised myself that this abuse of trust would not define the rest of my life. For a while, we moved around each other like strangers in the same house. He sulked. He slammed a few doors. His phone buzzed more often, and he always stepped outside to answer it. I did not ask whom he was calling. I no longer wanted to know the details of a world that had been built behind my back. A few days later, the public part of the story began without my planning it. It started with my sister. She came by one afternoon with a bag of vegetables from the market, laughing as she stepped inside, telling me how crowded it had been, how she had thought of me when she saw the fresh tomatoes. Her laughter faded when she saw the stack of folders on my table and the look on my face. I did not intend to tell her everything that day, but pain has a way of spilling out when someone who loves you looks closely enough. I explained the bills, the second account, the hidden expenses. I watched the shock appear in her eyes, followed by anger so fierce it tightened her jaw. She told me that this was not just my problem, that what he had done was not a mistake two people could quietly fix over dinner, that this was betrayal, and that the more I tried to cover it, the more it would cost me in the end. Word travels in families in ways we cannot always control. She did not go around blasting my story for entertainment, but she did confide in our older cousin, who had once gone through something painfully similar. From there, the truth moved like a quiet ripple through the people who had watched our marriage from the outside and believed it to be steady. Soon his sister called me, her voice trembling, asking if what she had heard was true. I did not give her every detail, but I did not lie. I told her that he had hidden money, that he had used it for things that had nothing to do with our home, our debts, or me. There was a long silence on the line. Then she whispered that she was so sorry, not for him. For me. His mother came by not long after. She sat at my table, her hands folded tightly together, eyes glossy with confusion. She asked me, in a soft, broken voice, why her son would do such a thing. I had no answer. I could only show her the bills, the statements, the numbers that stripped away denial. I saw something crumble in her that day. The image of her son as the responsible man she believed him to be cracked under the weight of hard facts. She did not defend him. She did not blame me. Instead, she reached for my hand and held it, whispering that I deserved better than this. When he found out that his family knew, that the story was no longer contained within the four walls of our home, his anger turned outward. He accused me of embarrassing him, of making him look bad, of turning people against him. He spoke as if the problem was not what he had done, but that anyone had noticed. But something important had changed. I was no longer standing alone in the dark with my doubts. The truth was out in the open now, visible to others. I had witnesses. I had support. I had people who saw me and believed me. The life he had built on secrecy began to wobble. He tried to control the story, telling his version to friends and coworkers, painting himself as a man under pressure, who had made a few small mistakes, a victim of stress and misfortune. But financial records are not swayed by charm. Numbers do not bend under excuses. Eventually, the counselor I had spoken with helped me begin the formal process of separating my finances from his. It was not simple, it was not fast, but each step was a quiet declaration that I would not be carried along by his choices anymore. The consequences were no longer just between us. They had stepped into the light, and with every person who saw the truth, the burden he had placed on my shoulders grew lighter. When the truth reached the outside world, it did not arrive with shouting or chaos. It arrived quietly, like a curtain being pulled back in a crowded room, revealing something that had been hidden in plain sight. People began to look at him differently. It started with small shifts, subtle changes in tone when they spoke to him, glances that lingered a second too long. His sister avoided meeting his eyes during family gatherings. His cousins no longer greeted him with the same warmth. The neighbor who used to call out friendly hellos now offered only polite nods. Actions speak, even when words stay soft. I kept my composure through all of it. My intention was never to humiliate him. I had no desire to burn down his world in anger. My only goal was to reclaim my own life, to step away from a marriage built on illusions. But secrets have a way of floating to the surface, and once the tide carried them out, there was no pulling them back. The first real consequence came at a family dinner his mother asked us to attend. I went because she had asked gently, almost pleadingly. She said she wanted everyone to sit together, to understand what had happened, not out of blame but out of clarity. When we walked into the warm dining room, the air was thick with unease. The table was set with simple dishes, steam rising in gentle curls, but no one reached for the food. They were waiting. His mother spoke first, her voice steady but fragile. She asked him what he had been doing, why he had taken money meant for their home, why he had chosen secrets over honesty. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked, like a mother who wanted to understand where her son had been lost along the way. He tried to defend himself at first. He said I was overreacting. He said I had misunderstood. He said things were more complicated than they seemed. But each time he offered an explanation, someone in the room quietly corrected him, reminding him of the evidence, the dates, the undeniable transfers. It was the first time he could not twist the truth to fit his version of events. Surrounded by people who loved him, he found himself facing the reality he had tried to hide. His niece, usually quiet, asked why he had allowed his wife to struggle alone. His sister asked if the other woman was worth the damage he had caused. His uncle, a gentle man, who rarely spoke harshly, said in a low voice that betrayal is not judged only by the act, but by the intention behind it. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, feeling the discomfort ripple through him like a wave he could not outrun. He kept glancing at me, as if hoping I would rescue him from the weight of his own actions. But I remained still, calm, not out of coldness but because my heart was tired. I had carried the pain long enough. He left the dinner early, unable to endure the scrutiny. His footsteps echoed sharply down the hall as he exited, leaving behind a silence so thick no one dared to break it. His mother covered her face briefly with her hands, and then she reached for mine, squeezing gently, as if offering both apology and support. The next consequence came at his workplace. I did not know the details at first, only that something had shifted. He came home earlier than usual, walking in with stiff shoulders and a forced calm that barely held itself together. Over the following days, pieces of the story emerged from whispers and overheard conversations. Someone had noticed irregularities in his expense reports. Someone had asked questions about the personal charges mixed with professional ones. There had been meetings behind closed doors. Long silences. Tension. Eventually, his company placed him on leave while they reviewed everything. He told me about it with tight lips, insisting it was unfair, that they were judging him too harshly, that it was only temporary, but the truth was plain in his eyes. He was losing control of the life he had built on shifting sand. Friends who once sought his advice began to distance themselves. Invitations dwindled. Calls became rare. Trust, once lost, does not return easily. Meanwhile, I continued moving quietly, steadily, through the next steps of untangling my life from his. The counselor guided me with patience and clarity. My family supported me without loud opinions or bitterness. Even neighbors who barely knew me offered small kindnesses, like a warm greeting or a gentle hand on my shoulder. Through it all, I focused on staying dignified. Not because he deserved grace, but because I deserved peace. One evening, he asked me why everyone was turning against him. He said he felt betrayed, as if the world had shifted in ways he could not understand. His voice trembled with frustration and disbelief. I looked at him, feeling a calm that had taken months to grow inside me. I told him that the world had not turned against him. It had simply seen the truth he had hidden for so long. He stared at me, unable to argue, because for once, there was nothing left to distort. The consequences he faced were not punishments, they were reflections, they were the natural outcome of choices made in secrecy and selfishness. And as more people learned the truth, the weight of his actions settled around him like a shadow he could no longer escape. Through all of it, I kept standing. Softer than anger, stronger than silence. Rooted in the quiet courage of a woman who had finally opened her eyes and refused to close them again. Healing does not arrive with fanfare. It does not knock loudly or announce itself. It begins quietly, often on ordinary mornings when you least expect it, like sunlight slipping through curtains left slightly open. The morning after everything settled into clarity, I woke before the alarm. The house was still, touched by the soft gray light of dawn. I could hear the distant hum of birds outside, the faint rustle of leaves brushing against the window. For the first time in a long while, the silence did not feel heavy. It felt spacious, as if the air itself had room to breathe again. He had moved into the guest room by then. It was his idea, offered in a half-hearted attempt to show some kind of remorse or distance. I accepted the gesture only because the space between us had already grown far wider than any hallway. As I stood at the edge of the bed that morning, I realized my first thought was not about him. It was about myself. My own future. My own voice. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, and something inside me softened. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. I made coffee in the kitchen and stood at the window while the kettle boiled. The smell wrapped around me, warm and grounding. I sipped slowly, feeling the heat sink into my palms. That simple moment felt like the first inhale after holding my breath for months. Later that week, I met with the legal counselor again. She laid everything out clearly, carefully, with a kindness that made me feel seen rather than judged. She explained the steps for separating finances, the importance of protecting my share, the ways women often lose more than they realize when they walk away quietly. I listened with steady attention. I took notes. I asked questions. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt in control of my own story. Once the paperwork was underway, something inside me began to lift, like a weight loosening its hold. I started going on long walks after work, letting the rhythm of my footsteps soothe the ache inside me. The neighborhood looked different now, brighter somehow, as if the world had been waiting for me to return to it with open eyes. I stopped avoiding mirrors. I brushed my hair slowly in the mornings and traced the faint lines near my eyes, not with regret but with recognition. They were marks of surviving, of caring too deeply, of learning. I cooked meals for myself again, not out of obligation but out of care. I filled the house with the scent of garlic and warm bread, letting the aromas replace the stale air of secrecy and doubt. One Saturday morning, my sister came to visit. She entered the house with her usual energy, carrying a small plant with broad green leaves. She placed it on my table and told me, in her own gentle way, that every new beginning deserves something alive to grow beside it. Her words sank into me like warm water on cold skin. We spent the afternoon cleaning, laughing occasionally, moving slowly through the rooms that had once held so much hurt. When she left, I stood in the doorway watching her walk down the path, grateful in a way I had not felt in a long time. Small things started bringing me joy: a warm towel from the dryer, a clean countertop, a vase of fresh flowers I bought for myself without feeling guilty, a long bath with scented soap, quiet evenings listening to soft music, the comfort of a book that held me gently when my mind wandered into old pain. Healing came in layers. Some days felt steady, others wavered. There were mornings when the memories rushed back sharply, tugging at old wounds. There were nights when the house felt too quiet and loneliness pressed against my ribs. But even on those days, I no longer felt lost. I was moving forward, sometimes slowly, but always forward. Eventually, he moved out completely. The day he gathered his things, the air felt strangely calm. There were no screams, no pleas, no dramatic scenes, just the soft sounds of boxes being carried, drawers closing, footsteps fading. I watched from the living room, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. Some endings do not need rage to matter. They need only truth. After he left, the house felt different, lighter, as if someone had opened every window and allowed months of stale air to escape. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, opening the curtains, reclaiming the space as mine. I planted my sister's gift in a ceramic pot by the window. Every morning, I watered it gently, watching small new leaves appear. It became a quiet reminder that growth begins again even after seasons of neglect. The counselor checked on me occasionally. My coworkers noticed I seemed brighter. My family held me close in their quiet ways. Even strangers offered kindness in passing moments, as if the universe had conspired to show me I was not alone. I began to dream again, small dreams at first. A class I wanted to take, a recipe I wanted to learn, a trip I had once imagined but never planned. Each dream felt like a stepping stone across a river I had feared to cross for too long. With time, even my memories of him changed shape. They no longer stung with the same force. Instead, they became lessons carved into the edges of my heart, reminders of what I would no longer accept, of the strength I had found within myself, of the way pain can become a pathway to clarity. Healing did not arrive all at once. It arrived in steady breaths, in quiet rooms, in gentle mornings where hope felt possible again. And slowly, I began to build a life that belonged to me. As the months passed, the sharp edges of my story softened. The pain did not vanish, but it became something I could hold without trembling. A part of my past rather than a weight on my present. The house felt different now, filled with calmer breaths and the quiet hum of a life making its way towards something new. There were evenings when I sat on the back steps with a warm cup of tea, watching the sky shift from soft blue to dusky purple. I would listen to the distant sounds of the neighborhood and feel a kind of peace I had not known in years. The air felt lighter, my chest felt freer. Even the silence felt kinder. I often thought about the woman I was at the beginning of all this. The one who stood in the kitchen stirring thin soup, trying to believe that love could make sense of confusion. I held her in my heart with tenderness. She was not weak. She was hopeful, and that hope was something I carried with me still, shaped now into something stronger and clearer. Healing taught me that losing someone who betrayed you is not the same as losing love. Sometimes it is the first step toward finding yourself again. I learned to trust my own instincts, to hold my own ground, to believe that I was worthy of honesty, stability, and gentle care. The life ahead of me is not fully mapped. I do not know exactly where I am going, but I know who I am as I begin the journey. And that is enough. Now, as I sit here sharing my story, I find myself wondering something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed, or would you have walked away to protect your peace? If my story has touched you, stay with me, share your thoughts below, and let us keep supporting one another through the stories that shape our lives.